Have you ever wondered, like, what really separates those people who just excel in, like, whatever they do from, like, everybody else? I mean, it's like we all have those moments, I think, where we're just, like, kind of in awe of somebody's abilities,
Yeah.
Like, how do they get so good at that? So today we're going to do a deep dive into a book called Talent is Overrated by Geoff Colvin to kind of unpack this whole question. Is it really all about natural talent, or is there something else going on here?
Well, it's so fascinating how deeply ingrained that idea of innate talent is, in our culture. And Colvin really challenges that head on in this book. Like he throws these curveball examples at us right out of the gate, like Jeffrey Amelt and Stephen Ballmer.
Oh, yeah.
These guys became like titans, at GE and Microsoft, but their early days at Procter and Gamble,
Right.
like nobody saw that coming. They weren't exactly rock stars right out of the gate.
Okay, see, that's already making me rethink things a little bit,
Yeah.
right? Because if these future CEOs weren't, pegged as superstars early on, then what was it? What happened that allowed them to achieve those extraordinary things later in their careers?
And that's exactly the point that Colvin drives home. He uses those unexpected success stories to kind of set the stage for this central argument of the book, which is that deliberate practice is the real engine behind exceptional performance, not some mystical talent that we're born with.
Yeah, I'm kind of grappling with this idea that talent might be, overrated because I've
Yeah.
always thought that, some people are just naturally gifted.
Yeah.
How does Colvin actually address that?
He doesn't dismiss the idea of some sort of genetic component, like completely. There might be some predispositions that we're born with, but his argument is that even if they exist, those inborn advantages are way less significant than we think. And he backs this up with research showing that in many fields, years of experience don't actually correlate with better performance.
Hmm.
Like, think about it. We've all encountered people who have tons of experience, who are just kind of okay.
Yeah. So does
They're
it
terrible, but they're not great either. It's like that saying, 10 years of experience could just mean 1 year of experience repeated 10 times.
Yeah. So there's this like gap between experience and actual like true expertise. What's bridging that gap then?
Yeah.
What's happening there?
That's where this concept of deliberate practice enters the picture. It's the key differentiator, like the secret sauce that sets the highest achievers apart. And this isn't just about working hard, it's about practicing with like laser focus and intention specifically to improve performance.
Okay, so can you break this down for me? How is this deliberate practice different from the way, most of us approach practice? Like, let's say I'm trying to improve my golf game, right? I'm going to the driving range, I'm hitting some balls, I'm practicing, right? Yeah.
You are. But imagine this, like most of us go to the driving range, we hit a bunch of balls, maybe we try to tweak a few things, but we're not really zeroing in on our weaknesses or pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zone.
Okay, yeah, I'm totally guilty of that. I just keep hoping that the next swing will magically be better.
Exactly. You just kind of go through the motions. But deliberate practice really flips the script. It's about designing specific activities to target those weaknesses, pushing beyond your limits, and constantly seeking feedback to adjust and improve. So you're not just playing golf, you're dissecting your swing, analyzing your grip, and just meticulously refining every single aspect of your game.
That sounds intense. And honestly, it doesn't sound as fun as just like hitting the balls and not thinking too much.
Yeah, it requires a very different mindset. It's not about having fun, it's about pushing yourself to the point of mental exhaustion even. And honestly, I think this is where a lot of people fall short. They're just not willing to embrace that discomfort and to put in that truly hard work.
So it's about being really intentional, really relentless almost in your pursuit of improvement. Are there any like really good real world examples of this deliberate practice in action? Like how does this actually play out?
Yeah. Well, Colvin uses Chris Rock as a great example. So think about his stand-up routine. It's not just him like riffing on stage. He honed that material by performing in small clubs night after night, meticulously refining each joke, the delivery, based on the audience's reaction. He wasn't just going through the motions, he was deliberately practicing his craft, even when it meant bombing in front of like a small crowd.
So he was using those small gigs almost as like a laboratory basically to experiment and refine his material. I love that. It's a great example of how deliberate practice can work even in a less like formal setting.
And speaking of less formal settings, there's this really fascinating story in the book about the Polgar sisters, these chess prodigies that were raised on a diet of, well, chess. Their father believed that anyone could become a genius with the right training. And so he intensely homeschooled them, focusing heavily on chess. They spent hours each day, studying, analyzing games, practicing talk about deliberate
And they all
practice.
became like incredibly successful chess players, right?
They did, though it's interesting because they didn't all reach the same level of achievement, even with that really intensely focused upbringing. Judith, the youngest, became the highest ranked, and by all accounts, she was also the most dedicated to practice. So this shows us that even within a family that was devoted to deliberate practice, individual differences in terms of commitment still play a role.
Okay, so it's not a guaranteed formula for everyone. It's a combination of that deliberate approach and also the individual's own, like, drive to excel. But it's all starting to make sense now. Like, why someone can have tons of experience but still not be exceptional at what they do. It's not just about the time, it's about how that time is spent, what they've been focusing on.
The Polgar sisters' story is a perfect illustration of that. But there's actually another layer to this, the actual impact that deliberate practice has on us, not just in terms of our skills, but physically and mentally as well.
Okay, now this is where I think it gets really, really interesting. So, Colvin really digs into the science of how this kind of practice actually rewires our brains, our bodies for peak performance.
Yeah.
It's like building a mental muscle, right?
Exactly. And he outlines three key ways that this transformation happens. So first, deliberate practice develops the superior perception. You start to see more, you notice finer details, and you can extract more information from less.
So it's not just about working harder, it's also about working smarter. It's like upgrading your mental software.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Imagine being able to spot market trends that others miss just because your deliberate practice in analyzing data has trained you to see patterns that others don't. That's the power of this enhanced perception.
Okay, that's a pretty compelling benefit. Um, so what's the second way that deliberate practice changes us?
It helps you to organize and expand your knowledge. So you're not just accumulating random facts, you're building deep, interconnected domain expertise.
It's like you're building this incredible mental library, meticulously organized, filled with highly specific, really relevant information.
Right. And because it's organized so well, you can access and apply that knowledge much more effectively when it matters most.
Yeah, this is reminding me of how those like chess masters can recall thousands of board positions seemingly effortlessly. It's not just raw memory, it's like a highly structured knowledge base they've developed.
Precisely. And that brings us to the third transformation. Deliberate practice enhances memory, but it allows you to develop specific memory skills that are directly related to your area of expertise.
So it's not about having like a photographic memory. It's about developing a highly specialized memory that's laser focused on, your specific field. Like it's not about remembering grocery lists. It's about remembering the things that truly matter for your craft.
Exactly. And that's why a chess master might remember thousands of board positions, but struggle to remember what they had for breakfast this morning. It's all about developing the mental tools you need for your specific domain.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to learning and skill development, to be honest. Like if these abilities aren't fixed and we can train ourselves to perceive more, know more, and remember more through deliberate practice, that's incredibly empowering. But how do we actually apply these principles in the real world? Because a typical work environment doesn't exactly scream deliberate practice, does it?
Yeah, that's a great point. Most workplaces aren't really set up to foster this kind of, intentional development. They're often more focused on just getting things done than on helping people get better.
Yeah, you're often expected to figure things out on your own, like sink or swim. But I'm guessing Colvin has some ideas about how to kind of bridge that gap.
He does, and that's what we'll explore next.
So we've established that, most workplaces aren't exactly like hotbeds of deliberate practice. But Colvin doesn't just like leave us hanging there, does he? He offers some guidance on how to like apply these principles even when our, 9 to 5 isn't really designed for it.
You're right, he does. And he actually gives us some great examples of individuals who found ways to, make it work, even in circumstances that were, well, less than ideal. Take Benjamin Franklin, for instance. He was like, the OG of self-improvement.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember reading about this in his autobiography. Didn't his dad point out some flaws in his writing? And that kind of kick-started his whole, like, self-education journey?
Exactly. So as a teenager, Franklin considered himself, a decent writer. But his father actually showed him how his writing lacked, certain qualities. Elegance of expression, method, and perspicuity were his words.
So young Ben basically got called out on his writing. What do you do about it?
Well, he didn't get defensive, that's for sure. He got proactive. He sought out writing that he admired, specifically the essays in The Spectator, which was a popular British periodical at the time. And he studied those essays intensely, like really dissecting them to understand what made them so effective.
So he basically created his own like master class by analyzing the work of writers that he considered to be the best. Like he reverse engineered their expertise.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, but he didn't stop at just analysis. He designed a series of exercises to actually target specific aspects of his writing, like sentence structure, vocabulary, organization.
Oh, now that reminds me of the Polgar sisters and their intense chess practice regimen. It's like Franklin turned his writing development into like a game, with specific rules and challenges.
Yeah. That's a really interesting parallel. He definitely approached it with a very deliberate and structured method. So, for instance, to improve his sentence structure, he would take each sentence of a Spectator essay, summarize it in just a few words, put those summaries aside for a few days, and then try to reconstruct the original sentences from memory.
Wow.
And then he'd compare his version to the original, pinpoint his weaknesses, and refine his approach.
Wow, that's a pretty ingenious way to practice without having like a formal teacher or coach. What about vocabulary? How did he tackle that?
Well, he noticed that poets often had to use a very diverse range of words to fit the, rhyme and meter of their poems. So he started rewriting Spectator essays in verse, forcing himself to find creative ways to express those same ideas within those constraints.
So he was like hacking the poetic form to expand his vocabulary. Pretty clever. Did he have any like tricks for improving the organization of his writing?
He did. He would write these short summaries of each sentence in an essay, put them on like separate slips of paper, shuffle them all up, and then try to put them back in the original order.
Hmm.
So this really forced him to think deeply about the logical flow of ideas and how to structure an argument effectively.
These are such simple yet like brilliant techniques. It really shows you how you can like design your own deliberate practice, even if you don't have access to fancy courses or expensive coaches or anything like that.
And what's even more impressive is that Franklin was doing all of this while working as an apprentice in his brother's printing shop. And this was a demanding job, that left him very little free time.
So he was basically squeezing in deliberate practice, like before work, after work, on Sundays, whenever he could find like a spare moment.
Yeah.
That level of dedication is definitely inspiring, but also a little bit intimidating, to be honest.
Yeah, it really highlights the commitment and discipline it takes to achieve mastery. I mean, Franklin understood the value of deliberate practice long before the term even existed, and he was willing to prioritize it, even when it meant sacrificing, leisure time and comfort.
His story is such a powerful reminder that, deliberate practice isn't about having the perfect conditions. It's about making the most of the time and resources that you have.
Hmm.
That being said, I still struggle with like applying this at work sometimes. There's always something urgent to deal with, right? It often feels like there's just no time for anything beyond putting out fires and meeting those deadlines.
Yeah, and that's a really common challenge. And it kind of speaks to a larger issue that Colvin addresses in the book, which is that most organizations simply aren't structured to support deliberate practice. They're geared towards, efficiency and immediate results, not long-term skill development.
Yeah, it's like you're rewarded for being busy, not necessarily for becoming better at what you do.
But you mentioned earlier that some organizations actually get this right. What sets them apart? What are they doing differently?
Well, Colvin points to the U.S. military as a prime example. They've really fully embraced the principles of deliberate practice, investing heavily in training and simulations. So they actually create these environments where soldiers can practice critical skills under pressure, receive immediate feedback, and really learn from their mistakes.
It's like they've built this massive, like, real-life video game designed to turn soldiers into, like, peak performers.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate analogy. The military understands that in those high-stakes situations, you can't rely on instinct or luck. You need to have practiced those skills to the point where they become second nature.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about businesses? Are there any companies that kind of stand out as examples of, fostering deliberate practice in their employees? Yeah. Colvin highlights GE under Jack Welch's leadership. They really understood the value of developing deep domain expertise in their managers. So they actually had this program where they would rotate high potential employees through different roles and departments, just giving them this really broad exposure to the business.
So it wasn't just about like climbing the ladder in one specific area. It was about gaining this like holistic understanding of the company and the industry.
Yeah.
It's like they were cultivating like well-rounded leaders rather than like specialists.
Exactly. They recognized that deep knowledge of the business was absolutely crucial for making, informed decisions and driving innovation, and they were willing to actually invest the time and resources to cultivate that expertise in their people.
So even within, a large complex organization, it's possible to create a culture that actually supports deliberate practice. But it sounds like it takes a real commitment from leadership, like a willingness to prioritize long-term development over those short-term gains.
Absolutely. It has to be woven into the fabric of the organization, not just an afterthought or a perk. But Colvin argues that this investment pays off big time in the long run, leading to a more skilled, adaptable, and innovative workforce.
Yeah. It's like that saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. But instead of fishing, we're talking about, developing the skills and knowledge to thrive in this, ever-changing world.
That's a perfect analogy. It's about empowering people to learn, grow, and adapt, not just perform a specific task.
Okay, so we've seen how deliberate practice can be applied at like the individual level, like Benjamin Franklin meticulously refining his writing, and then at the organizational level, like the military and GE investing in those structured training programs. But there's another layer to this whole thing, isn't it? The team dynamic. How do these principles apply when you're trying to, make a group of people more effective as a unit?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting because it's not just about individual skill development anymore. It's about creating a shared understanding, a synergy that allows the team to perform at a level that's beyond the sum of its parts.
Oh, I love that idea of synergy, a team operating on this whole other level.
Yeah.
It's like that old saying, teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Yeah.
But as we've seen, deliberate practice is anything but dreamy. It's hard work, pushing your limits, embracing discomfort. So how do you translate that to a team setting? How do you get a group of people to not only, buy into that, but to actually thrive on it?
Well, first of all, it requires a shift in mindset, right? You have to recognize that deliberate practice isn't just for individuals. It's a powerful tool for team development as well.
So instead of just focusing on, individual goals and performance reviews and things like that, you're creating opportunities for the team to actually practice together, to learn from each other, to get better as a unit.
Exactly. But as we discussed earlier, there are some, common pitfalls to avoid when it comes to this team-based deliberate practice. Things like poor team composition, lack of trust or unclear goals can really sabotage even the best intentions.
Yeah. We talked about, the importance of picking the right team members,
Yeah.
people who have complementary skills and can work together effectively. But even with like a great team, trust is crucial, right? If people are afraid to, take risks or make mistakes, they're not going to push themselves or each other to improve. It's like they're playing it safe instead of going for the win.
That's a great analogy. And building that trust takes time and effort. It requires creating a safe space where people feel comfortable being vulnerable, admitting their weaknesses, asking for help.
Yeah, it's about fostering a team culture where it's okay to fail as long as you're learning from those failures and getting better. Mistakes become like stepping stones rather than roadblocks.
Exactly. Because mistakes are inevitable, especially when you're pushing your limits, trying new things. But it's how you respond to those mistakes that really makes all the difference. Do you sweep them under the rug and pretend they didn't happen? Or do you use them as an opportunity to learn and grow?
That reminds me of something that Colvin said about feedback being so crucial, right? It's not just about praise or criticism. It's about providing, specific actionable information that helps people understand what they're doing well and where they can improve.
Yes. And this is where the repetition aspect of deliberate practice really comes in. You need to create opportunities for the team to practice the same skills, repeatedly, get that feedback, make adjustments, and then try again.
It's like rehearsing a play or running drills in sports. You're not just going through the motions. You're really working on like specific techniques, timing, coordination, all the subtle things that really add up to a stellar performance.
Exactly. And that repetition helps build muscle memory, both literally and figuratively. You're creating those neural pathways that make those skills more automatic, more instinctive.
But doesn't that kind of contradict the idea of avoiding automaticity that we talked about earlier? Isn't the whole point of deliberate practice to stay, conscious and in control.
That's a sharp observation. And it is important to distinguish between the type of automaticity that comes from, mindlessly repeating the same tasks over and over again and the type that comes from deliberate practice.
So it's not about becoming a robot. It's about reaching a level of mastery that allows you to perform complex skills effortlessly without having to, overthink every little detail. Right?
Precisely. Think about a professional musician or an athlete. They've practiced their skills to the point where they can perform them almost instinctively, but they're still in control. They're still making those conscious decisions about how to, adapt and respond to the situation.
Yeah, it's like they've internalized those skills so deeply that they become part of their intuition, part of who they are. It's like a superpower.
That's a great way to put it. And that's what deliberate practice can do for teams as well. It can help them develop that shared intuition, that way of working together that's fluid, adaptive, almost like a sixth sense.
It's like they're developing their own, team mind, where they can anticipate each other's moves, communicate effectively, solve problems creatively, almost as if they were a single organism.
That's a powerful image, and it really captures the potential of deliberate practice to transform not just individuals, but entire teams and organizations.
This has been an incredible deep dive into deliberate practice. We've covered so much ground already, the individual level, the organizational level, the team dynamic. But before we wrap up, I want to kind of circle back to something we touched on earlier, the role of passion and motivation. It's clear that deliberate practice requires a level of, dedication and discipline that honestly most people aren't willing to put in. So what is it that makes some people so driven to excel, even when it's, hard and uncomfortable? What fuels that fire?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. So, we've really explored how this whole idea of deliberate practice can transform individuals, teams, even entire organizations. But there's still this big question that's kind of lingering in the air, right? Like, where does the passion come from? This drive to excel, to push yourself through years, sometimes even decades, of this really demanding practice. It can't just be about willpower, right?
Right, because let's face it, deliberate practice, as we've discussed, is hard. It's about pushing your limits. It's about embracing that discomfort. So what is it that makes some people, so willing to just kind of go all in, even when it's tough?
Well, you're right. It's not just about gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to do it. It's much more nuanced than that, and there's really no single answer. But Colvin does dive into some fascinating theories in the book about, the origins of this drive.
Because, if deliberate practice really is the key to unlocking that, exceptional performance, that mastery, then understanding what fuels that dedication, that commitment,
Yeah.
that seems really crucial, right?
Absolutely. And one really intriguing theory that Colvin explores is this idea that the very act of deliberate practice can actually become its own source of motivation.
Okay. So you're saying that even though it's, challenging, demanding, there's something inherently rewarding about pushing yourself, about seeing yourself improve. It's like that feeling of accomplishment becomes almost like addictive in a way.
Exactly. That sense of mastery can be incredibly motivating. And as you get better and better at something, the challenges actually become even more enticing. You're constantly leveling up, unlocking new abilities, pushing your boundaries even further.
Yeah, I can totally see that. It's like you get a taste of what you're truly capable of, and then you just want more. You want to see, how far you can push yourself, how good you can really become.
That's the beauty of it. There's always a new challenge, a new skill to master. And that constant striving for improvement, it can really become this driving force in your life.
But isn't there also a social aspect to this as well?
Yeah.
Like being around other passionate people can kind of fuel your own fire.
Absolutely. Colvin talks about how passion can be contagious. If you're constantly surrounded by people who are complaining, who are settling for mediocrity, it's so easy to get pulled into that same kind of mindset.
Yeah, you're absorbing their negative energy, their lack of ambition. It's like you're all thinking together.
Exactly. But if you surround yourself with people who are passionate, who are constantly striving to learn and grow, their energy can be so infectious. Like you start to see the world differently. You see possibilities where you once saw limitations.
Yeah. It's like they're showing you what's possible, expanding your horizons, pushing you to kind of raise your own game.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to be intentional about the company you keep, the books you read, the information you consume. Surround yourself with influences that inspire and motivate you, that challenge you to be your best.
So it's not just about, finding your passion. It's about creating an ecosystem where that passion can really flourish. But this brings up something that's been on my mind throughout this whole discussion. What about belief? How does that factor into like this whole equation of passion and deliberate practice?
Well, Colvin emphasizes the role of belief as, a key ingredient in achieving greatness.
You mean like believing in yourself, believing in your ability to actually reach your goals?
Yes, but it actually goes even deeper than that. It's about believing that deliberate practice actually works, that it can transform you into the person you want to be.
Yeah, because if you don't really believe that it's possible, then why even put in all that effort? Right? You're basically just setting yourself up for failure right from the start.
Exactly. And that's where I think a lot of people stumble. They look at those who have achieved great things and think, well, they must have some special talent, some innate ability that I just don't have. And so they give up before they even begin.
Yeah, they're putting like a ceiling on their own potential,
Yeah.
limiting themselves before they even, step onto the playing field.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is that the research actually shows that this belief in innate talent is often a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you're limited, you're less likely to push yourself beyond your comfort zone. So you never really discover what you're truly capable of achieving.
Yeah, it's like that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
That sums it up perfectly. And
Yeah.
that's why Colvin's message is so powerful. Greatness isn't reserved for like a chosen few.
Hmm.
It's available to anyone who's willing to put in the effort to embrace this journey of deliberate practice.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, don't let limiting beliefs hold you back. Don't let the fear of failure stop you from chasing your dreams. But I have to admit, it can still feel like pretty daunting sometimes, dedicating years, maybe even decades to mastering something. I mean, that's a huge commitment.
It is. It is a significant commitment. And that's where the question of passion becomes, so crucial, because without that deep driving desire, that like fire in your belly, it's almost impossible to sustain that level of effort over the long haul.
So it's not just about choosing like a goal. It's about choosing something you're truly passionate about,
Yeah.
something that really lights you up from the inside out.
Absolutely. When you're truly passionate about something, the effort doesn't feel like a burden. It actually feels like a privilege. The challenges, they become these exciting opportunities, and the setbacks, they become fuel for growth.
Yeah, it's like you're tapping into this like boundless source of energy, this inner drive that propels you forward even when things get tough. You're not just going through the motions, you're pouring your heart and soul into it.
That's the magic of deliberate practice.
Yeah.
It's not just about acquiring skills, it's about becoming the best version of yourself, unlocking your full potential.
This deep dive has been incredibly thought-provoking. It's definitely challenged my assumptions about talent and success, and it's really inspired me to take, a more deliberate, intentional approach to my own growth and development.
Colvin leaves us with a really powerful question in the book. If deliberate practice is the key, what's one area you are passionate about where you could apply these principles to reach a higher level?
Ooh, that's such a fantastic question for our listeners to kind of ponder. What are you truly passionate about? What potential might you be overlooking? We really encourage you to, reflect on your own beliefs about achievement and explore the possibilities that deliberate practice might unlock for you.
Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about striving to be better than you were yesterday.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Talent is Overrated. We hope it sparked some new ideas and inspired you to embrace the transformative power of deliberate practice. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.